Hey everyone, I hope that your first week has kind of come to a nice, calm close, that you didn't have any major issues or hiccups as the week went on, that you are feeling good about your start in the program, and that particularly you're feeling good about what we're going to take a look at in theories and techniques over the course of the semester. So, what I'd like to do in this brief lecture is just kind of give you guys an overview of where we're headed. As you know, there are two courses in the Theories and Techniques sequence. There's Theories and Techniques 1 this semester, and then Theories and Techniques 2 next semester. So looking at the first course, at our course, what we kind of do, if you step back and look at the semester, is we start out looking at some very kind of basic counseling skill items. And then from there, we investigate more deeply the theoretical reasons for the things that we do. In other words, we kind of start with what we do and then move over into why. So in my talk today, I'm kind of even starting before that point because I am in fact going to talk a little bit about why, or I guess kind of jump the fence to talk more about theory and the role of theory, kind of to provide a framework for us to be thinking about theory throughout the semester. So what is the role of theory in psychology and counseling and rehabilitation counseling, in any of the helping fields? Well, really, the idea of theory is a lot simpler and closer to the ground than I think we tend to think, than at least I initially myself think when I think of theory. All a theory is, really, is a way of simplifying complex dynamics, complex behavioral dynamics in the case of counseling and psychology. So we want to use theory to look at the way that people act and what people do and all of the complexity therein, and we want to have kind of a simple way of seeing that, a way that allows us to kind of get some insight into why people do what they do, and to some extent to be able to predict what people are going to do. Now, in line with this idea, theory is something that grows over time. So, the earliest theories, say psychodynamic theory, Sigmund Freud's theory, has kind of been added on to, amalgamated, changed, departed from. So it's something that's shared by professionals, by theoretical developers. And as new theory gets developed, we're generally trying to reconcile new theory with old and established theory. So we're not generally trying to disprove an existing theory, because again, the theory is just a story or a way for us to understand what's going on. So the emphasis isn't so much on coming in and saying, oh, they had this wrong, they had that wrong, they had the other wrong, because the theory is just a tool for understanding. So we really, as theorists ourselves, are trying to contribute to existing body of theory in a way that furthers the understanding that's already in place. So then, kind of going back a little bit to what theory actually does and what it is, I use the term heuristic a lot of the time to describe a theory. A heuristic is just kind of a mind trick, like sort of a simple way of remembering things. is a definition of heuristic that makes sense to me. Again, that story of being able to hopefully, so it can help us solve problems. It can help us develop a practical approach to something that is really abstract or complicated. It might not be perfect. A heuristic, neither a heuristic nor a theory is going to be perfect, because neither of them are real, if you will, or concrete. They're tools for understanding. So they help us with problem solving, with learning, in times when we can't derive an optimal or perfect solution, in times when we can't actually physically see what's going on. They provide us a mental shortcut so that we don't have to spend all of our precious mental energy figuring out details, if that makes sense. So there's the theory piece, and that's what I kind of ask everybody to think about as we step into looking at the specific theories, to think in those terms about theory generally. Then there's the techniques component of the course, which, like I said, is actually where we're going to be shifting back to pretty soon as we get a little bit more into the meat of the content. So when I talk about technique, especially the technique stuff that we'll be looking at this semester, I'm talking about kind of really sort of foundational ideas about the values and attitudes that we bring into the room when we're working with clients, about how we actively listen to clients, about how we conduct interviews, how we explore thoughts and feelings and behaviors with clients, what kind of action skills we have, to make that happen. And then I think, especially in rehab, we like to emphasize a strengths-based perspective. So we like to think about all of these things in a way that's really trying to find out what's best and what's most strong and what's most adaptive in people, and trying to grow those parts of people, rather than an approach that is more fundamentally rooted in diagnosis or pathology, where we'd be trying to find out what's wrong with people. Not that we don't want to be cognizant of major problems that people have. That's just not our primary main emphasis. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of those values and attitudes that permeate across theories and techniques to help make a good, strong therapeutic relationship. I'll provide a little bit more context for this in just a couple of minutes. But these are some values and attitudes that are specifically helpful when you're doing counseling. It's empathy. It's bringing a non-judgmental attitude to the people that you're helping. It is fundamentally accepting the people that you're helping. It is doing your best to be genuine with folks, to show genuine respect and genuine warmth. We also want to be patient with people. We want to be open-minded. Figure in your role as a helper, you're going to bump into people whose values are very different from yours, irrespective of what your values are and their values are. I guarantee you will help someone whose values are very different from yours. It's important to have a clear idea about what your role is relative to their values. It's not to change them. It's not, my role as a counselor is not to kind of step in and set someone straight. I have to meet that person where they are. And that involves some working to overcome stereotypes, really nurturing a positive view of human nature. So why do we do this stuff? Well, it's professional behavior, right? It's how we expect to be treated by any professional, physician, counselor, psychologist, attorney. But in our field, it's also specifically important to do your job, to do well at your job. And we will see that across theories, these characteristics that I mentioned a couple slides back, I would reverse and show them to you again, but I'm afraid it would mess up my audio recording, so I'm not going to. The slides are available without audio, though, so you can flip through them at your own pace. But the open-mindedness, genuineness, warmth, non-judgmental, all of these characteristics come together to form something called common factors. A lot of them were first explicitly identified in Carl Rogers' person-centered theory, which we will look at. But maybe more importantly and more broadly, they're characteristics that really run across all successful counseling and psychotherapy theories. Hence, they're called the common factors because they're common to all theoretical approaches. Now, why, even more specifically, are they important? Well, a significant body of research, and actually a chunk of this research went on at University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I came from, not in my department, but in the counseling psych department, which was closely related to ours. A big pile of research tells us that 70% of outcome variance, so 70% of how good people do from therapy, how good the actual effect of the therapy is due to factors that are common to all types of factors, these common factors that I mentioned. So these are things other than specific technique. So these are things other than, I do cognitive behavioral therapy, or, I'm a psychodynamic therapist, or, believe it or not, I'm still doing Gestalt work with people. Obviously, we want to find a theoretical orientation that works for us and that we understand pretty thoroughly, but really, the type of theory and the specific theory and technique has far less to do with how well folks do after therapy than these common factors, which are also characteristics that can be inherent in counselors. So who the counselor is in the presence of common factors is highly determinant. So things like the working alliance that I was talking about, empathic listening, skills for active listening, the degree to which folks feel like we're being genuine with them. This is where the action really is in therapy, even more than in specific theories or techniques. Especially, I guess I should say techniques. Theories maybe are more driven to developing an understanding, so they're not even as action-oriented. But the techniques that are derived from theories are action-oriented. And again, they're important, but more important are these common factors, components that you'll see across theories. So I know I'm kind of repeating myself here, but I want this message to really sink in for us. Counseling effectiveness is way more strongly associated with individual therapists than with the specific outcome. So how you do as a therapist, your strengths as a therapist, and your fundamental skills as a therapist, your ability to establish common factors is going to have a bigger impact than what theoretical approach you choose. Does that make sense? So, to reiterate a little bit, the counseling characteristics that facilitate a strong working alliance are those that are related to good clinical outcome. And we haven't talked about Carl Rogers yet, but we will. And for those of you who aren't at all familiar with Carl Rogers and or person-centered therapy, that's fine. We're in our first semester. A lot of times people come in with knowledge about Carl Rogers. His theory was really explicitly focused on the importance of empathy, of being non-judgmental, of acceptance, of genuineness, warmth, respect, all of these kinds of things. So we want to really be thinking about how we can get that stuff happening. And that's how we're going to end up focusing a lot on skills before we really dig deep into theory. We're going to be thinking about things like eye contact. What's the role of posture? How do we kind of make little signs to folks to let them know that we're engaged, that we care what they're saying, that we're understanding what they're saying. So all these things on the slide that you see are little skill ideas that we'll talk about and then look at more closely when y'all are here for the in-person week. But stuff like eye contact, leaning forward, just kind of nodding, letting people know that you're tuned in. These small things are really huge for making good therapy happen. Whether you're in a psychotherapeutic setting or whether you're doing straight up rehabilitation counseling with people, which is the background I come from. Excuse me. And again, I'm kind of reiterating some stuff I talked about at the beginning. We want to be developing skills for probing, clarifying, interpreting, gently confronting people. How do we confront people with sort of inconsistencies in their perception of themselves? How do we summarize what they're saying? We're going to look a lot at these little teeny bite-sized skills because they're the pieces that really make the difference. I touched a little bit on at the beginning that we, especially in rehab, like to focus on a strengths-based perspective. And that's a perspective rooted partially in the belief that dysfunction is seldom something that resides just in a person. It's very rare that a client or individual comes into our office or into our lives where the dysfunction that they're experiencing is really just because they're messed up. Oh, here comes a messed up person, I'm going to fix him. That perspective isn't going to serve us real well. A strengths-based perspective is hip to the idea that dysfunction is an interaction between an individual and an environment that isn't a perfect fit for that individual. So there's some adjustment to go on in the environment, there's some adjustment to go on in the individual. A lot of times when individuals can gain insight into their environments, they can see where the sources of dysfunction are, and that allows them to access their strengths and do a better job with whatever it is they're trying to do a better job. We'll take a look at client interviewing skills rooted in this perspective. That'll involve purposeful conversation. It is clients who are in charge in a sense, but at the same time we do want to sort of guide and steer interactions. We want to help folks be able to see a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in the therapeutic relationship, there are specific tasks that are completed at each one of these stages. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the wide range of actual theories from psychodynamic all the way up to postmodern. And what I'd like to what I'd like us to look for is, where do we see common factors in each of these approaches? And then what the theories become, from a clinical perspective, is tools that are a good fit for us. Because let's say cognitive behavioral therapy does work really well for me. It's a good match for me. Well, it's a good match because it allows me to implement common factors. So hopefully that gives us a sort of an introductory sense of where we're headed. I think I mentioned this in my greeting last week, but I love theories. Theory is like my big thing. I'm into it. It's where my research interests lie. It's why I'm involved in this field. So I think we're gonna have a great time. I'm gonna go ahead and sign off here and share any other information that I have to share with you guys in written format elsewhere in the module. Okay, take care, everybody. Have a great weekend, or if you're just getting to this and it's Monday, I hope you did have a great weekend. Bye-bye.